What's up guys, New Account here. Today I want to bring you my Rachel guide for BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle. Rachel is a proud immortal vampire sorceress that guided the characters of the BlazBlue universe through their struggles. She has a condescending personality and is quick to give a sophisticated tongue lashing to those around her. One interesting note is that Rachel almost never uses her hands directly to fight. Instead, she uses magic, pieces of her dress, and her abused yet faithful servants Nago and Gi to do the fighting for her. As for gameplay, Rachel is a character that can adapt to any given situation or playstyle. She can control the field with her traps and projectiles, or she can get in your face for some insane high-low mix-ups. The general consensus is that Rachel is a hard character to play, but that shouldn't deter you from playing her. It's really not that bad once you practice. In this guide, I'd like to break down the fundamentals of Rachel for new and veteran players alike. We'll talk about Rachel's normal and special abilities, her wind usage, her playstyle and neutral game strategies, mix-ups and Oki setups, and lastly I'll give you some combos to get you started. If there's a part of this video you're exclusively interested in, there will be a timestamp in the video description. Although if you are a new Rachel player, I recommend watching it in its entirety. As a side note, I'll be using the numpad notations for this video. If you're coming back from the BlazBlue series, Rachel's overall game plan remains relatively the same. If she wants to zone, she can zone, and if she wants to mix you up, she can mix you up. But the biggest change to Rachel compared to her BlazBlue counterpart is her wind control. Rachel no longer has a dedicated wind button. Instead, wind is activated when a direction is pressed after a specific normal or special move is used, but we will get to that. First, we'll discuss her normal and auto combo chains. 4A is a quick 2-hit jab used when you need a fast normal and when you're close to your opponent. Her 5A, 5AA, and 5-2A create mini tornadoes in front of her and are buttons you will be using a lot in combos and block strings. Her 5AAA causes her to twirl around doing multiple hits and can be manipulated by the wind, while her 5AAA is a knockdown auto combo ender. You honestly won't be using that ender very often if at all. Her 5V turns her dress into a fork and knife and is a good mid-range poke tool as well as a combo filler. Her 5V auto combo turns her parasol into a weapon and causes enemies to go into a crumble state and is good for combos. "2B is her cat chair and should only really be used in combos and as a pseudo reversal sometimes. This move does a good amount of damage but is very unsafe on block. 5C is the universal overhead that has a decent range, while 2C is her multi-hitting sweep. For her air normals, she has her A chain, which is mainly used for combos. Her JB opens up the parasol and is very good for hitting enemies above you, and her JC comes crashing down, causing a mini ground bounce that allows you to follow up. All of her normals may be special cancelled except for 2B. Her DP can also be noted here as it is a massive tornado that covers a vertical distance and works as an excellent anti-air. Rachel's first special move consists of her Lobelias, which can be executed by doing 2-3-6 A, B, or C. They are relatively slow moving projectiles that upon hitting an opponent or landing on the ground create a lightning rod. Rachel may have up to 3 lightning rods at any given time. The A version shoots a Lobelia in front of Rachel, the medium shoots a Lobelia in an upward arc, while the EX shoots 3 Lobelias at different angles. Lobelias can be influenced by Rachel's wind to speed them up and change their trajectory. All Lobelias may be performed in the air as well. The lightning rods can be transformed into homing bats by using 2-1-4A. Upon hit, the bats will detonate, dealing a good amount of damage. If you are close enough, you can convert the bat detonation into a combo. Rachel may also choose to detonate the rods themselves by using 2-1-4B or Sword Iris. At the cost of 1 bar, her final special move is 2-1-4C or George the 13th. When George is within the enemy's range, he will electrocute them, holding them in place and dealing damage. He is a very powerful friend to have. As for her distortions, Rachel has 2. First is Tempest Dahlia, or 2-3-6 B plus C. Rachel gathers the nearby wildlife, tossing them to her enemies, filling the screen with projectiles. This may be used in combos, but I typically use this to slow down an enemy's momentum. It's a quick way to slow down pressure and re-establish your zone game. Your second distortion is Baden Baden Lily. This Distortion is your go-to damage super, so use it to secure a kill. Take note that Bot and Lily also detonates the lightning rods you have set, so ideally you want to use it when you have 3 lightning rods stacked for maximum damage. Fortunately, there are combos that can enable that. And very briefly, her assist. Rachel's neutral assist sends her twirling towards her enemies and is a good tool for block pressure and combo extension. Her forward assist sends out 2 Lobelias which cover a respectable amount of airspace. You can use this to cover your approach or enhance your zone game. Her back assist is a sword iris which will track enemies within a certain range and also detonates all the rods on the field. So one strategy can be to place rods with 6p then detonate them with 4p. So the defining mechanic for Rachel has always been her wind. In the previous games, she had a dedicated button to manipulate the wind in any direction she chose at any time that she chose. In BBTag, wind is activated upon using a specific normal and inputting a specific direction. Essentially, when you use a normal or a special ability that can activate wind, you press and hold the direction you want the wind to go. Not all normals or directions work, however. Her normals that activate wind are 5 AAA, 5 BBB, 2C, all of her air normals, and all of her Lobelias. But really just play around with it and see what abilities activate wind for which direction. Since wind is dependent on the direction you press, you will need to train yourself to control your 236 and 214 inputs, as sloppy inputs will lead to accidental wind. Rachel is wind and wind is Rachel, so take the time to understand and master this mechanic. So Rachel's playstyle is divided into 2 separate but equally important parts: zoning and mix-ups. If you're a beginner Rachel player, I'd focus on learning her zone game first, since this will make up a majority of her neutral game. Learn to keep your opponents out and bait them into making mistakes such as running into bats and Lobelias. Your zone strategy is pretty simple once you get the hang of it. Fire winded A Lobelias if they're trying to approach on the ground, and fire B Lobelias if they're trying to approach from the air. Another good trick is to use the jumping A Lobelias since they cover a good arc that also covers jumping and travel further than your ground Lobelias. Make sure to detonate the Lobelias with either 214A or B. Mix it up and don't let your opponent figure out which one you'll be using. Make them understand that standing under a rod is not safe, as you can detonate them at any given time. Lastly, you want to use George when you have meter to spare. George is excellent at covering the ground area and it's also affected by the wind. When George is out, players have 2 options. They can try to jump over him, in which case you can toss air Lobelias, or they'll try to kill him, which will get them hit by George or your Lobelias. Sometimes opponents just opt to sit on the other side of the screen until he's gone. But take note that George does do a small amount of chip damage and builds a small amount of meter on block. So a blocked frog is not a wasted frog. Overall, your zoning strategy is to keep your Lobelias up and try to cover your opponent's options as best as possible. Detonate Lobelias and turn them into bats as often as you can, and use George if you have the meter to do so. Try to have the Lobelias spread out to cover the most area that you can. Also, don't forget this is a team game, so use your assists to cover your gaps. Probably the best thing to do is just show you in a real match example. I apologize if there's any dip in quality for matches as they were taken from my PS4 replays. I lost S early in the round due to a series of bad calls and ended up with just Rachel versus 2 almost full health characters. My first goal was to create space for myself and to reset the neutral. Whenever my opponent approached, I would push block him. I wanted to keep Gordo out and be out of his 5B range. Eventually, after a few stumbles, I managed to get the first hit that would allow me to gain momentum. I created bats from the Lobelias I previously placed and my opponent runs into them, allowing me to set more Lobelias and George. My opponent tries to avoid George by jumping in at me, however the wind from the Lobelia toss slowed down his forward momentum. I took the opportunity to set another Lobelia and another George. My opponent does not allow me to begin my block strings, so I opt for more George and more Lobelias. After a few block strings and a cheeky cross-up, I land a DP and set a winded Lobelia. Notice the pattern here. Whenever I get space, I set up George and Lobelias. Gordo's health has been drained by nothing more than stray hits and chip damage from the resonance until I got him low enough for the kill. The remainder of the match is just a guessing game and I happen to have guessed right. I did not challenge Hyde's normals with my own because his have a longer range and can lead to heavy damage. Instead, I opt to go for reads, throws, and DPs. However, this was just a personal decision that I made based on the set that I had with the opponent. Rachel's second playstyle is a more aggressive, high-low mix-up oriented, and I'd argue is one of the strongest in the game right now. There are few instant overheads in the game, and Rachel has a really fast one. Her melee game revolves around using her wind to manipulate her movement. When done correctly, Rachel is essentially able to do short hop light jabs overheads to keep the opponent guessing. This is done by jumping and then immediately pressing 2A. If you're brand new to fighting game, this will take time. You want to get J2A, not J1A or J3A. Don't stress yourself over it. It's not absolutely mandatory that you learn this if you're new to the game, but it is mandatory if you want to take Rachel to the next level, since this is the foundation of her mix-up game. Another tool in her pressure kit is actually her Lobelias. Having rods placed in the corner while you're pressuring your opponent gives you more options you could use to open them up. When creating block strings, any one of Rachel's buttons is free game, except for 2B. Really, avoid using 2B, and it should only be used in combos and occasionally as a pseudo reversal. So now let's talk about the really good Rachel stuff, her mix-ups and Oki game. There is no way for me to cover all possible Rachel mix-ups. That is something you'll have to come up with over time. For now, we can talk about the basics. I will admit, this section is geared more towards intermediate players or people who have played fighting games before and just never played Rachel. Even for your new fighting game players, this section is still relevant so you can see what this character is capable of. As mentioned previously, the instant overhead is Rachel's go-to tool for opening people up. You can jump cancel block strings randomly and throw it out, or you can use it on their wake up. This tool becomes even more powerful after you've conditioned your opponent to block it, because now instead of going high, you can also go low or go for a tick throw. Rachel can do 2A, 5A, 2A, or she can do 2A, 5A, J2A, and that is pretty much the fundamental Rachel mix-up. Take the time to really build the execution required for this technique. You really want this to be something you can use on command. One word of warning, however, you can be DP'd out of J2A if you're becoming predictable. Another interesting thing Rachel can do is corner crossups. This is again carried over from the BB series and can be accomplished with one of two methods. The first one, which is pretty simple, is that 5AA pulls opponents towards her ever so slightly. Therefore, you can 5AA in a block string, then instant air dash behind your opponent with an assist call. This will catch people once or twice. The second method is using wind. Rachel also forces her opponents to move when she uses wind, even if it's just pixels. Therefore, you can actually jump over your opponent, then press J1A and she will land behind them. You can then hit them with a cross-up blow, since chances are they will be standing after reacting to the jump. Another one of Rachel's tricks is TK Sword Iris. For those new to fighters, this is in reference to Sagat's old Street Fighter II Tiger Knee input, but in fighting game terms it refers to inputting specials then pressing jump at the end so that you can use an air move as low to the ground as possible. You want to use TK Sword Iris essentially to reset pressure. If your opponent blocks TK Sword Iris, you are incredibly plus on block. There are several reasons this works as a tool. First, after your opponent blocks the lightning, you are in complete advantage. You can either go for a low hit, go for an instant overhead, or go in for the grab. They have to guess what you will do. From my experience from the BlazBlue games is that once you've trained people to block the instant overhead, they start expecting it and will start standing up anytime Rachel's body stands off the ground. Their mind will react to Rachel leaving the ground for the TK Iris, causing them to stand before they realize that it's just an Iris. You'll be back in the ground before most people can readjust their block, and you'll catch them low. But even if they catch the feint and are still blocking low, you can just easily go for the instant overhead after the TK Iris. This tool is incredibly powerful and should be part of your kit. And to wrap up this section, we'll talk about her Oki game. Rachel's Oki can get pretty dumb once you've mastered it. Between George, Lobelias, and Bats, your opponent's only safe option is to block or gas. You want to try and end your combos with a 2C into Bats or a Lobelia. This will force your opponents to block, or they can risk a DP. If they choose to block low, you can use an instant overhead on their wake up, which will cause them to eat the Bats and you'll get a full combo. If they try to predict the overhead, they have a chance of getting hit low and you'll get a full combo anyway. As usual, grab is also an option. If you're feeling really cheeky, you could probably do a winded cross up on their wake up. Another powerful Oki tool is George, which is the same concept as the Bats. Place it on wake up and now your opponent has to guess. It should be noted, if you place George and tag out, George will not be destroyed if the tagged partner gets hit. So BBTag is a tag team fighter, therefore Rachel will need a partner that will enable her to play to her strengths or cover her weaknesses. You typically want a character with far-reaching horizontal assists that will cover the ground approaches while you are trying to zone. You also want to consider someone that would allow you to convert off of winded A Lobelias. S is a good partner for Rachel since she has a projectile assist, an anti-air assist, and the 5P allows for easier combo conversions. Another notable Rachel partner is Gordeau. Grim Reaper single-handedly does everything Rachel needs. Another thing about Grim Reaper is if the opponent push blocks during the assist, Gordeau will eat the push block instead of Rachel, allowing you to do free high-low mix-ups. Ruby also complements Rachel really well since her Frog Oki game becomes pretty dumb at this point. If you call Ruby Assist and George during your opponent's wake up, you can actually tag into the assisted Ruby and George will become a cross-up. Yu Narukami works with everyone and Hyde just has amazing assists all around. What's most important is that you find someone that works for you and that can enable Rachel's zone game through horizontal or vertical control as well as enhance her mix-up game. So I've compiled some combos ranging in difficulty and damage. These are just baseline combos that should get you started if you choose to go with Rachel. If you choose to modify these combos, you want to make sure that your combo ender gives you an advantage somehow, whether that is placing a Lobelia, Bats, or George. If you choose to make combos easier, that is also okay. It is better to have a consistent combo and lose 100 damage than to drop a combo just for 100 or 200 damage. This is something done by the pro scene all the time. Overall, Rachel is a powerful, well-rounded character that takes practice to master. Her ability to control the pace of a match with her zoning and then immediately switch to crazy mix-ups makes her a force to be reckoned with. Rachel is my favorite character in any fighting game, and I have years of experience and tech with her. Picking up Rachel in BBTag was like walking for me. However, my first few weeks with the character back in the days were rough. If this is your first fighting game and your first time playing Rachel, don't beat yourself up if you can't get it immediately. I've held my fair share of butt whoopings when I first started playing Rachel. I promise you with time it will all click and you will learn to enjoy this incredibly unique, powerful and rewarding character. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, not so much for me, but so that the video has a higher chance of being seen by others. My goal here is to educate everyone and not so much for the views. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.